Marianne, good afternoon and welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being here. I very much appreciate your time and we feel very grateful for you.
Thank you for having me. Very excited about our chat.
You are most welcome. Marianne, just for a starter, can you please introduce yourself and tell the audience who is Marianne and what do you do basically?
Basically, I'm a Pilates instructor, I guess. That's what I say at parties when I don't want to spend too much time explaining what I do. And that's kind of like the core skill that I started with 9 years ago. But I'm also a women's health advocate. So I spend a big chunk of my time and energy connecting people to other health specialists and educating them. So I like to say that I'm an educator. I'm trying to help people live healthier lives.
Marianne, if you don't mind me asking, why is that important for you on a personal level? Why is that important for Marianne?
You're going to make me cry from the start. No. So I think probably 3 layers to it. The first layer is that my dad was severely mentally and eventually physically ill. He suffered from severe problems of addiction. So from a young age, there was quite a lot of trauma around that. And also, as a child, you do want to help, but you're not equipped to help. And I think back then, neuroscience weren't what they are today. And so sometimes, even to this day, I'm 37, he's been gone 13 years. And I'm like, oh, I wish I knew what I knew then, So that's probably the first layer to it. The second is I had a lot of injuries as a child because I was a rhythmic gymnast, and the medical community wasn't super helpful. I grew up in the south of France, in a small village. We trained very hard, like 25, 30 hours a week, but we didn't even have a physiotherapist to support us as a team. So it took a long time for me to understand how to physically recover after I had to quit sports. So that would probably be the second layer. And then the third is that I had a very challenging first birth experience here in the UAE. It didn't have to be that hard. It was really a complete failure of the system. And I want to avoid, all the time I've spent healing myself, I want to fast track it for people. I want to give them tools that are easy from all the research I'm doing, all the exploration. Not everyone has time or loves health topics as much as I do.
Right.
And I still want to support people in that respect. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Marianne, if you know, actually, like what you mentioned about the healthcare system is something that I hear from a lot of people, that we are lacking heavily when it comes to, let's say, our approach or the healthcare approach to certain injuries, certain situations. Why do you think is that? Like we are now in like advanced technologically. I think we have matured from the past. So why do you think we are still lacking in this aspect? What's your perspective?
It's hard to know. I think there is a tendency to want things to be fixed quickly. That is also in part the responsibility of people, but I mostly feel like and I'm not an anti-capitalist person at all, but I do think that our capitalistic system makes it so that even health and food are very much treated as things that we want to make more profitable. And I do think that has its role in the way health is even conceived. Like I was talking to a lady who was in the pharmaceutical industry at a networking event recently, and she's like, "Yeah, I've been into health in the health industry for so long," and I was like, "No, you've been in the pharmaceutical industry for so long." It's two very different things, and they could overlap if we with the big companies, big corporations wanted them to, and I hope one day they do. But I think that's why people like myself end up having to educate and support. Support in my case, I support a lot of women because they are prey to these systems, and we are taught to have so much respect and reverence for doctors. And don't get me wrong, a lot of them are very passionate, but the very way they're supposed to see you for 20 minutes and move on, and then they have no time to do further research, or it's just not working even for them to be fulfilled humans who exercise. I know a handful of awesome doctors who practice sports on a regular basis. They're all so happy, or they seem happy about, oh, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. And everyone is like that, not just doctors, but there's that thing that busyness grants you worth. And I think that's absolute BS. Although I am very busy myself. I think we all are busy, but it's not something that I carry as a badge of honor. It's something that I would like to free myself from, if that makes sense.
Very true. Actually, what you mentioned about like being busy, I think nowadays it's how we are evaluating our self-worth by how busy we are, in a sense. Like if we are busy, it means that we are achieving more. It means that we are always occupied and so on. But as you mentioned, it's a complete BS because we sometimes tend to miss on life by focusing on being busy, in a sense, in a matter. Like we miss life by just focusing on achieving.
On doing, because I think because we think that that's something we can prove gives us worth. But if you think of the people you love in your life and who make you smile and who make the world a better place, it's not because of their titles. It's not because of their bank account. Me, that would be my grandmother. And she lived a very modest life on a very small salary her whole life. And anyone who's ever been around her is touched by her grace. So yeah, I think if we could just take a step back from time to time and stop racing and chasing achievements. And don't get me wrong, I do it too. Like I can't wait for my first book, and I can't wait for my first this and that. Sometimes I step back and I'm like, oh, let me just put the phone down and just be with my kids, because they'll remember that and it will give them that confidence and they will make the world a better place.
Very true. And that's pretty beautiful, actually. Marianne, let me get into Pilates. How can you define Pilates? And for example, what can this tool help us in our daily lives? How can we use it?
Pilates was created by Joseph Pilates. He was a German man who was in a prisoner's camp during the First World War. So he was seeing a lot of people who were injured, and he only had rough access to, beds, and he just started attaching resistances to it and just created his own machines. Then that's why the Pilates machines look like bed or torture machines. And I think he was revolutionary in the sense that he used exercise as a healing tool, and over time in the 50s and 60s, Pilates became more well-known in the ballerina industry because he was fixing so many ballerinas. And today, the contemporary version of it has been, I'm not going to talk about the fitnessy vibe that we're in right now, which is what has made Pilates a bit trendy. And you will have these studios where there are no clinical and technical skills at all. But when I'm talking about Pilates, the way I'm practicing it, it is a clinical tool to either support people through their fitness classes, or if they have other goals, it's a postural and mindful discipline that can help them either recover from injuries or prevent them, or simply be better at their own sports. So I do see triathletes. And triathletes are commonly very strong in their quads, very tight in their hips. And we work on counteracting that through some pelvic mobility. And Pilates has a strong emphasis on core, right? On core work. And I think no one can, everyone needs core work. So what I love is that it's super inclusive. I have clients who have had a stroke, and I have clients who are top athletes. And everyone can benefit from it, and it doesn't have to be your main discipline. But it does give you a sense of embodiment in your physical practice. So
Very beautiful. So can we use Pilates, for example, like as a preventative tool in addition to it being as a rehabilitative tool? Can we
absolutely.
prevent injuries? Yeah.
Yeah, we can prevent injuries. I think if you have a mix of Pilates and strength training, you're really set.
Mhm.
Because and for some people who are super sedentary, then Pilates is going to be their strength training, and that sure was my case, not because I was sedentary, but because I had injuries at a young age. And then when I felt ready and I felt like I was plateauing in my practice, I moved on to adding strength. But for the most part, wait, I lost my train of thought. So, oh yeah, can Pilates help us preventively?
Yeah.
Absolutely, particularly when it comes to range of motion or compensating for a practice. Like my husband, he's a
Mm.
tennis player. So there's a lot of, right now, a lot of rotation, a lot of,
Twisting, yeah.
the knees take quite a bit of a toll.
Agility movement.
Yeah, agility. And so, of course, you can do that with your physio, but you can also do that with your Pilates instructor if they're clinically trained. And the other big section would be people who are office workers, are hunched over all day long and do need a bit of counteracting of this.
Hmm.
I'm forward folded all day, or my lower back is collapsed all day. With Pilates, we can prevent all the classic injuries of the 21st century, the lower back concerns or shoulder and
Yeah.
neck concerns.
One of the most common nowadays, actually, like whoever I talk to, like the first thing that they tell me, they either have a neck pain, shoulder pain, or a back pain, which is the most common. I think like it has arisen from our, let's say, new lifestyle of staring at the phones too much and sitting on chairs.
Is I've told you when we were chatting before this that we've been looking for a studio space for a while, and the reason why I want a studio space is not just because I want a team, but it's also because I want to be able to offer group classes for specific ailments that the majority of people I know have. The other day, my client Claire, I was talking about this chest opening and strengthening of your mid back kind of class that
Hmm.
I used to lead ages ago. And it's not a sexy class, but everyone
Hmm.
I know needs it. And she was like, yeah, I mean, if you have a baby on a phone, you need you need that class.
Yeah.
And I would argue that you need that class if you're simply living in this century.
Hmm. Especially because like nowadays, like actually every time I go walk around outside, everyone is just staring at the phone, hinging their back, extending their neck,
Gosh.
and yes,
Yeah, it
and
gives me
it's terrible.
tension just talking about it,
Thinking
like
about it.
and I think my tension comes from the fact that my coach recently upped my my traps and pecs training. But overall, I'm puzzled about the phone thing. I'm a bit I don't make many friends when I start talking about phone. And again, I'm very much on my phone for work. But yesterday I was at
Mhm.
the hospital waiting for an appointment. And of course, my surgeon was 45 minutes late. um, we
Because
go,
why not?
no, because we go back to that God savior complex that we also have a responsibility in the way we accept it. We tolerate it. Have you ever screamed at your doctor because they were late? No, but would you scream at, let's say, me if I was 45 minutes late today? Probably. And you would be right. I mean, I would be taking your time for granted. So I was there. And luckily, I had taken a book, Fasting Like a Girl. I'm not sure if it's about intermittent fasting, the benefits
Yeah.
of fasting, which I am trying to convince myself of, but I really don't like fasting. I love my food. I get too cranky. So I'm there in the hospital. I am literally the only one on a book making a good use of my
Yeah.
time. Because don't tell me that all these people on a Saturday were handling work stuff. Most of these
Yeah.
people were on TikTok, and it's not their fault. It's super addictive, but at some point you have to take a step back and be like, okay, what have I learned today?
Yeah.
I wasted, and whenever I spend too much time on Netflix or too much time on my phone, At the end of the day, I'm like, oh, I'm not content. I haven't learned anything today. And then I take responsibility for that, you know?
Actually, speaking of the screen time, the other day I was reading about a statistic, like 16 to 24 years old nowadays are on an average of 9 hours per day on screen. Can you imagine? 9 hours in the day. It's annoying. It's kind of like the human race is in de-evolution status. We are not evolving.
Sorry, but just go and have sex instead.
Exactly. Like for nine
Protected
hours.
sex. But I mean, no, maybe not for 9 hours. But I mean, you're 16
Yeah.
or 20. Just go do fun things. Go to a dance club, or I don't know. That's just so sad
Do
to
something.
me. Yeah, just use the fact that you're at the peak of your physical health. You don't have to do anything about it, and you can pull an all-nighter and wake up fresh.
Yeah.
Enjoy that. Learn a language. Hook up. You hook up with people. I don't know. Do something else. Just don't be on your screen.
Don't be on the screen for 9 hours.
do
Like
you
nowadays, I just like,
do,
huh?
do you have kids, Reda?
No, I
No,
don't.
no, not yet. So my eldest is now 7 years old, and most of his friends in his tight knit group have a PlayStation and play every night.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, oh. And you know how hard it is, because it makes me the difficult mom.
Yeah.
And it's just, and I know I'm going to be the mom who doesn't want him to have a smartphone. And I know he'll be
Hmm.
embarrassed about it. And I know we're going to fight about it. But
Yeah.
I was at the studio earlier, and a woman was probably in a class, and her girl, who must have been 6, was on an iPad taking pictures of
Mm.
herself and create. And don't get me wrong, you need these skills eventually. But you really want to give your child access to an iPad phone now, and we can't supervise it? That I'm that kind of mom where I'm like, that's a big no. And when we think about, I don't know, when I'm too much on my phone, for I'm too much on Instagram because I need to create content and I need to, work with the algorithm. I get so much anxiety, and so much. I don't know. There's so much addiction to the likes, and there's so
Yeah.
much stress that comes from the opposite. Like, I got bullied a few months ago by a fake profile,
Hmm.
of course, and it was harder than being bullied by a real person, because I didn't know who she
Hmm.
was. And I assume it was a she, because I don't know men who would do sneaky things like this, but
Yeah.
I could be gender prejudiced. Um,
Bias or something.
but a vast majority of my community are women, are female. But I was like, who has that kind of time again? And just, I don't know who you are. So imagine the stress. I don't know if this new client who's contacting me is a real person, or if they're going to be a psycho who's going to just, I don't know. You don't know.
Yeah.
That's very scary, I find. I want to protect them from my kids, for sure.
Not only that, but like because of this social media and how is it like being used as a tool to change the norm, let's say, and change the standards of society, new mental illnesses are like coming up more and more to the surface. And this is why anxiety and depression is now skyrocketing compared to before, because people are more and more lonely, even though we are connected virtually
It's so
somehow.
interesting. That's exactly what I was telling the nurse yesterday. So I was reading my book in that hospital, and I didn't have a pencil, and I like to take notes, but I don't like to damage my books. So I asked them
Yeah.
for a pencil, and they were all so kind. And all of a sudden, this woman comes down. She's like, "Are you the one who asked for a pencil?" Almost like I had asked for weed, and like, yeah, I'm so sorry. And they were so nice. But then the nurse is so next to me, there's a man on TikTok who's being really loud, doesn't have a headset. And then there's a
Yeah.
beeper behind me. And then there's this guy on the phone who's literally sat next to me having his, long, very loud conversation. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, is my reaction abnormal? It's not. It's sensory overload, and it's a lack of
Yeah.
respect, because just because you want to waste your time doesn't mean you should make me waste mine. I want to read my book, and I want to be in peace, and I'm not troubling you. So just create a bit more of a buffer between us. And
Yeah.
so when I told the nurse that, she goes, but what you do, we're more connected with our phones. I was like, really? Have you read the stats on
Really?
loneliness?
Yeah.
Have you noticed how people are lonely even when they're together
Yeah.
now because of their phone? And I always told my husband when we're next to a couple at a restaurant that is on their phone during a date night, I'm like, I'd rather not go out with
Exactly. Like,
you
why bother?
than feel so disconnected from you that I have to be on a device. And I would say my husband is quite addicted to his phone. I don't know if it's a male thing. I don't know. Or maybe a corporate thing, that he needs to disconnect, and this
Yeah,
is an
probably.
easy go-to. But when we go out, I make a point. You drop your phone, I drop mine. And sometimes he's like, oh, I want to show you. So it's a way of connecting, but I'm like, it's okay,
Don't
you,
show
you
me.
can describe it to me. And he
Yeah.
sometimes gets pissed off. But I'm like, this is so much better because you don't get distracted. Because if you show me, you're going to get distracted. So go ahead and tell me about it. I'm all ears. Sorry, I've been on a tangent, the phone stuff, but
Yeah, no, no, it's
yeah.
pretty beautiful actually. I was talking to a psychiatrist the other day, and she's telling me that one of the reasons why anxiety and, let's say, loneliness is more and more nowadays is because we as humans crave the human touch. And for example, she gave me an example of how children and kids, when they are still babies, they notice that if he or she grew up lacking the touch of the mother, they grow up more, let's say, emotion deprived. They don't know how love feels, and they feel lost compared to those who have the love, the touch of the mother, the father, and so.
I mean, I'm no expert. I mean, I'm no psychiatrist. I have had a psychiatrist for the past 11 years, so I do know a little
Mm.
bit about the process from the patient perspective. But I, I also know that when my kids and I hug, it's the best moment of my day. When my kids and I read a story in bed and they're next to me and they breathe next to me, it's
Yeah,
co-regulation happening of our nervous systems. It's that moment where we soothe each other without even doing anything. We're just reading a book, and
yeah,
it's my favorite time of the day. And when I miss that, I feel like I've missed something. When I was on the retreat, I was in Cyprus for 6 days, and it was
mm,
my first international retreat, so it was a bit stressful. I didn't sleep very well, but I noticed that the first night I was not sleeping well because I hadn't had that time with them. And my system is
mhm,
so used to that co regulation that I felt threatened. Not me mentally,
mm,
but my system, my physiology was not
yeah,
at its best, because it is used to that routine of no matter what crap happens to me during the day, they are there, and I am
mhm,
there for them. And I think that's something that no child should grow up without experiencing.
I see. Marianne, I want to get into the pelvis floor. You mentioned the pelvis floor prior. Can you please tell us why is it important? Like nowadays, I hear about uh, how the pelvis floor, if it's too tight, it's bad for us. If it's too loose, it's bad for us. So what's the optimal? How can we differentiate if we have a healthy pelvis floor muscle or not?
So, you first of all, if you have symptoms, you know that there's something called pelvic floor dysfunction of some kind. But the way I teach it to instructors and to my clients is that there are three things that the pelvic floor needs to be able to do, and it needs to be able to do it both reflexively, so without your having to
Hmm.
think about it, and under your control, so when you're doing it voluntarily. And that is to contract,
Hmm.
to lift, because that's the portion that's
Hmm.
often forgotten about when people squeeze and squeeze and squeeze, but that's not a full engagement of these
Hmm.
muscles. And then release. And like you've said, there's recent research from Anna Kroll. She's a
Hmm.
UK-based physiotherapist who has shown in her recent research that when you have a prolapse or you have incontinence, it's not always because things are loose, but very often it's because the fascia, so what surrounds your muscles, your connective tissue, is pulling things out of alignment. So you could have something called a stage 2 prolapse, with let's say it's bladder prolapse. So and so it would sound really bad, right? Because stage 3 is usually surgery. And if you're doing some good release work and some functional movement, well, you could magically have no prolapse anymore. So there's a huge difference between some people who, because of the quality of their connective tissue or because they're sedentary, hyper sedentary lifestyle, are at risk of a very, very relaxed and loose pelvic floor. Loose rather than relaxed. But that's not the majority of people I see. If anything, these are only a couple of cases. If you're walking every day, your pelvic floor can't be that lax unless you have a really bad birth. So you need to be able to contract, lift, and release. Whether you do it, your body has to be able to do it really quick without you thinking about it when you're jumping, sneezing, coughing. And then you need to be able to control that. So if, let's say, there is gas happening and you can feel it, you need to be able to hold it. So that's pretty much the definition of a healthy pelvic floor. It's not how many squeezes you can do. It's not what they insert, the probes they insert in you that tell you, it's doing this and it's doing that. It's, do you have symptoms and can you do all these things with ease? On a daily basis. And a lot of people can't relax. I don't know if you've ever had that, that pressure, that point between your scapula, if you're a bit tight.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
So in a lot of women, but also men, it can happen inside your pelvic floor. So your pelvic floor muscles, then they're not completely engaged and they're not completely relaxed. And we do want them to have a resting tone that is restful, not a resting tone where it's halfway in, halfway out. Because then when you're sneezing, it will be too tired to respond. Does that make sense?
Yes, I got it. Yeah. Actually, you're the first one who connects for me like the scapula and back, let's say neck pain with the pelvis. That's very interesting.
It's
The
muscular
other day I was hearing.
tension. Yeah, it's muscular tension. It's similar. And these are areas, if you think about it, where we get very defensive, right? This is these are, here people have the startle reflex where they'll tend to curve. And down there, well, it makes sense. It's areas that you need to protect because they're connected to your intimacy.
Fascinating. Marianne, can we talk a little bit about pre and postnatal, let's say, tips? For example, for someone who is pregnant right now, how can she care for herself, let's say prenatally? Then we're going to talk about postnatal, the things that she has to consider in order for her to care for herself, let's say.
Do you have 2 weeks?
Well, let's start. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So guide me along anything that would make more sense. But I think, first of all, we need to get rid of the fear of miscarriage related to exercise. I think in pregnancy, too many studios I see, and I fight them on this, do not allow women in their first trimester to show up. And if in your first trimester you're miserable and you're nauseous or you're sick, you shouldn't go to class. But if you're doing well and you're like yourself, you need to keep exercising because a lot of muscles are going to get tight and weaker very quick, regardless of whether or not you do exercise. So if on top of it you add, you become sedentary, that's not helping. So I want women to be clear on the fact that unless you're doing extreme sports, or are taking risks of falling on a daily basis. So like biking could be, something you might want to reconsider for a while if you're not a professional athlete. It would take a lot of stress for you to lose a child. It's usually when we start seeing stress affecting pregnancies in the form of miscarriages or just problems to the baby later in their development. We're talking earthquakes, tsunami, war, extremely stressful situation, not your Pilates class.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that being said, if someone is concerned about miscarriages, and they have it in their head that it could be related to exercise, then I will tell them I'd rather see you when you're past the 12-week mark.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have it in your head, and if anything were to happen, and miscarriages are very common and a very normal way of, even if they're extremely painful, of nature selecting their strongest. If you have that in your head, then I don't want you in class. But if you're just a healthy individual with no contraindication to speak of, please, please, please exercise in your first trimester. So that will be my first. Then do things that you enjoy, but also do things that support your structures. So support your pelvis, support your joints, because you are going to become looser under the influence of, and more mobile under the influence of hormones, particularly relaxin and progesterone. So we do want pregnant women to have an exercise routine that includes some elements of stability and mobility in the right proportion based on each woman's and then use your movement practice. Ideally, have a mindful movement practice to help prepare you for birth. Because if you've never meditated, if you've never dropped into the present moment, contractions won't be easy to handle, as opposed to if you're used to breath work and to being, let's say you do yoga and you're used to staying in poses for 15 rounds of breaths and being uncomfortable. I guess mindfulness, physical practices, and learning that discomfort is not always a threat is very important.
Speaking of discomfort, actually, somehow I think that humans usually have to go through, let's say, discomfort to feel better after. And that applies like to everything in life, like birth, training. I think that we as humans, as a species, we thrive and we, let's say, evolve when we go through certain struggles and then we cross them. This is what makes us better.
Provided that they are not enduring. You know what I mean? I think, for instance, I'm sure you've looked into trauma healing, and it's usually much easier to deal with one event. Let's say you got into an accident. It was very traumatic. You thought you were going to die. And then you do a bit of EMDR, where you desensitize the images in your brain through eye movement with a therapist. And usually that's very successful on that one traumatic event. I do find, and usually you grow because of that event. But the issue is when it's repeated. So I find that a lot of things have happened to me when I was older that were not that traumatic and that I handled well. Yeah. But what I don't handle well is anything that is reminiscent of the trauma of growing up with an addicted parent, So all these patterns that you create that last for decades, that is so hard to free yourself from. And I'm not sure if you are more or less resilient because of it, but I would argue that you're probably a little less resilient because you've had to use your resources for too long. Yeah, I don't know if that's something that resonates with you.
It did actually. Now I'm wondering, let's say the lady have delivered. Are there like certain things which she has to care more after, like certain exercises? How can she jump into training immediately after, or does she have to wait for a little bit?
So it's not. I always say it's not so much when you go back, but how. So, and everyone has a different timeline based on their birth, based on their level of physical activity prior. But the most important thing, and something that is, I'm lucky I come from a country that gives it to you systematically. You have a pelvic floor rehabilitation, regardless of how your birth went, whether or not you have symptoms. And that is extremely important, even if you had a C-section. And what I do postnatally is I offer the abdominal section of your rehab, because these muscles, of course, there's a natural repair that occurs on its own. So for the abdominal separation of, the six pack stretching out and coming back, it's usually 2 months. But after 2 months, there are studies that show for that specific concern of the abdominal separation that if you don't do anything after these 2 months, at 12 months, that gap between your six pack will be the same. The tone will be the same. So there is a natural repair system. And of course, if you're 2 years postpartum, you are less at risk of creating damage for yourself, because you don't have these hormones anymore. But if you haven't done the rehab, then the reflexes I was talking about earlier, you sneeze and your belly activates. Someone punches you and your belly protects your organs. You go for a run and instinctively, intuitively, your pelvic floor muscles, they know that upon landing, they need to support your organs. None of that will, there's no guarantee that this will happen if you don't do a bit of neuro and physical training to get that back. So for me, the first thing I recommend is doing the pelvic floor physiotherapy sessions to at least assess what the state is, because you could be feeling something and it might not be what's effectively happening. And the abdominal portion of your rehabilitation, not just for the women who have C-sections, but particularly these days with the number of C-sections that we see. It's becoming quite prevalent a practice. So it's very, very important to do rehabilitation. Like if you have a knee injury, you rehab it, right? You go to the physio.
Yeah.
It's the same with a pelvic floor or abdominal injury. Plus, you have these reflexive aspects that need to be taken into account. And then I think being progressive in how you load. Once you know how to regulate the pressure that is happening at your and that cylinder that is your
core, let's say, area.
Because if you're doing a squat, you would think like, oh, that doesn't affect my pelvic floor. Actually, a squat, if you're not regulating the pelvic floor yet, then the organs might be borne down. So you might be bearing down and creating issues for your pelvic floor. So traditionally at 6 weeks, we don't do a deep squat yet. We're not there. So all of that needs to be done that's why the breath is so important in rehab, because the breath, the pelvic floor and the abs, they work together. So you can really resist to that pressure. Is that too technical or is it?
No, I got it. Actually, it's fascinating. The fact that you mentioned that deep squatting, or sometimes if you don't know how to, let's say, manage the breathing, in, for example, such a movement, the organs will fail down because, like, the pelvis floor is the muscle that supports, let's say, the organs, and that's pretty fascinating, actually.
It's not necessarily fall down. Remember what I said about move out of alignment, but you're right. They will descend to some extent through tightness of the fascia and through that pressure. And it's something that is very different in women and in men, and that puts us at risk. Is you have a muscle that looks a bit like a horseshoe.
Yes. Yeah.
And after birth, it's no longer a horseshoe. It's almost a straight line, and it needs time to come back. And in women who have a vaginal birth, it doesn't completely come back, but you can tone it enough. But there is that space in the middle that you don't have a risk of your bladder or your rectum using that space to move out of alignment.
True.
And that's what women have to be a bit mindful about post-birth. Yeah.
Fascinating. So that's a main priority, I think, for the postnatal is the pelvis floor health or functionality, let's say.
The functionality of the core overall, because the abs are important as well. If the deep abs and that midline that has stretched out, imagining a chewing gum, once it overstretches and thins out, it can tear and then you can get hernia. And women, you're already so vulnerable and so busy with a newborn and with kids that are young. You don't really need to go and have surgery on top of it. It's not life-threatening, but if you think of the sense of self-worth, that we women traditionally are not very good at having, it adds to that. So at a time when you're vulnerable hormonally, so yeah, if we can prevent it, I don't understand
Yeah.
and just learn patience, which is not easy when you're postnatal because you
Yeah.
want to be yourself, quote yourself. But I always tell them you're patient now, and then for the rest of your life, you can do anything that you want. How does that
Mhm.
sound? As opposed to you mess it up now, and you're fucked, and you're going to have limitations for the rest of your life, and it's not fun. It's not helpful.
Marianne, let me ask you now, nowadays, wherever we look, we have a lot of access, or let's say we are privileged to have an access to many gyms, many, let's say, more food, and let's say healthier tools to make us better. So why is it that we as humans now, we tend to be lazier in a sense? We are not moving as much. It feels like we are a bit more weaker, let's say, compared to back then, to our, let's say, early 1900s. So, although back then they didn't have such an access to what we have right now, what do you think is that?
That's a big question. I worked in politics before in health policy, and I wish I had the miracle wand, but I think convenience is not always a good thing. I think not trauma, but discomfort is very important. Physiologically, it's important. Mentally, it's important. You don't create adaptations without breaking down some muscle fibers, right?
Mhm.
So you need to break a little to grow. And I do
Mhm.
find that there's a addiction. I mean, again, the food industry doesn't make it easy. The the way I don't know where it's coming from. I think it's the chicken and the egg. But what I know is that I sometimes struggle because I love effort and I don't really know where that comes from. Uh, and I am torn between the compassion I have and
Mhm.
how annoyed I get at the lack of personal responsibility. And I'm really torn because I have clients who are really suffering and they want to get better and they struggle so much, but they don't
Mhm.
often try hard enough. So it's just,
Yeah.
as a trainer, it's important to have that empathy, but also that firmness. And there's nothing worse I remember one client years ago telling me, "Oh, but you're so lucky because you're naturally skinny."
Mhm.
And I have my share of other problems that comes, you
Yeah.
know, and I'm not just lucky. I'm on my feet all day. I don't order groceries except for Kipsons. But I do go grocery shopping. I do lift. I don't like strength training, and I go 3 times a week just because I want to be a healthy,
Yeah.
strong 90-year-old. So it's not luck only. Yes, my flat stomach is definitely genetic.
Mhm.
I've worked really hard as a gymnast, but even if I don't do abs these days, I still have a strong core. But other people
Mhm.
have strong legs, or strong
Yeah.
arms, or everyone has their luck and has to work
Predispositions, let's say.
positive predispositions and then negative ones. Mine is sleep. Sleep is my burden, and so and you yeah. I think I find that that's one of the hardest things, not to lose your compassion and yet to be a bit firm and try to create an environment that is conducive to personal responsibility, which again the food and pharmaceutical industry are not helping with.
How can we guide people? Like, for example, someone who is planning to start, but they just can't seem to wrap their head around it. Like, how can we guide the community about the importance of physical activities, healthy eating, with all the noise around them, with all the distractions and all the media coverage of different information? They feel lost, I think.
Yeah, I think, well, we take away the noise. We
Mhm.
model what we want them to apply. I think it's very important to model to do what you preach. You can't, and in the same way you would do with your children. my 7-year-old, when he was 2, he was eating rocket salad. I mean, when I was 2, I wasn't eating rocket salad, but he's seen me eat salad ever since I was green salad, not pasta salad, ever since he's been born. So to them, it's just a rite of passage almost. And one day my youngest just comes to me and he's like, Mama, I ate
Hmm.
all of my broccoli today. And he's like so proud, and he's like, oh, I'm a big boy now. And because he sees adults do it in our household. And so I do think with our clients, there are two things. A, you model what you want them to want.
Hmm.
But B, you take them where they are. And that's probably the hardest part. You need to accept where they are in their fitness, in their
Hmm.
life, and in the changes that they're ready to implement. And you don't start big. You start very small,
Mm.
because small will stick. And this is where Pilates is awesome, because it's not as strenuous as lifting weights or as some cardio. It still
Yeah.
feels good. You still get all the good, feel good hormones that get you coming back. And I see it as a stepping stone to more arduous workouts.
Mm.
And with food, I think it's the same. Yeah, I tell them I eat candy and I eat a lot of dark chocolate. And
Yeah.
that's okay, it's my 20%. The rest of the time I eat organic, I eat my protein, my lean protein, I eat a ton of veggies. I love veggies. But I was lucky enough to be raised that way. I grew up in the Mediterranean, so we eat a lot of local vegetables with olive oil. And I think you can't start with diets that change everything or with routines that change everything. You start with, you make one change, you stick to it, you wait until you enjoy it, and then you add something else. So
Mm.
that's how they commit to their Pilates. And then eventually, oh, what do you eat? And then eventually, oh, you meditate. Oof, no, that's not for me. And then, oh, have you
Yeah.
tried meditating? Oh, maybe. And then eventually you lead a meditation at the end of class and everyone thinks it's normal. But yeah, slowly, slowly. Very Arabic of me to say.
Very small steps, actually, baby steps. I usually tell people baby steps. Don't think of the very big, grand picture from now because it's going to be scary and it might put you off. So start
Not
with achievable things.
sustainable. It's not sustainable,
Yes,
you know?
like drastic changes in lifestyle are not sustainable. For example, if you're someone who has been sedentary all your life, you cannot jump right now on the full gear in training, food, sleep, etc.
No, that's
So
a
baby
big
steps.
thing. That's a big problem with obesity. These
Mm,
people who are obese and who are told by their doctors, oh, you need to exercise more. Do you know how painful it is on your knees,
yeah.
on your joints to go for a long walk? Oh, yeah, do your
Oh
10,000
yeah.
steps a day. Do you know how hard it is when you're carrying that much weight and
Wait.
you've been carrying the toxins that enter the cells that stay stuck in these cells for so long?
Yeah.
You are out of breath faster and you are carrying that extra weight, but also your cellular system is not functioning at its best. So it's a lot easier for me to go for a 5 hour walk, let's say. I mean, not at the
Mm,
moment, I have a nerve injury in my foot, but
yeah.
then it would be for my clients who are overweight if it would be completely unachievable, and also it would make them feel like a failure. And when you feel like a
Mm,
failure, you're ashamed, and what do? You give into unhealthy behaviors. Shame leads to addictions or unhealthy behaviors. So I think the issue, yeah, baby steps, and that's why again, Pilates. If you put someone who's overweight
yeah.
on the machines, there is part of that weight is absorbed, and it gives them the space to get started without hurting themselves, so that eventually, with the help of their doctors, maybe with some allopathic solution, with a mix of interventions, when they're ready, they can exit that space and and become the best version, not the best, but the healthiest version of themselves.
Thank you so much, Marianne. This is wonderful. Before we close up the episode, do you have anything that you would like to share from your side? The floor is yours if you need to give any advice from your experience in life. Uh, Please, if you have anything to share before we close it up.
Oh, I think it would be not to think that anyone's life is easier because of how they look or
Yeah.
like, don't think that the athlete you're seeing, or that very pretty girl on the magazine that you think you want to be, have no issues. Just, we are all worthy humans with our share of crap and with our share of blessings, and maybe focusing on the blessings, or even on the blessings that the crap brings, can be helpful.
Pretty beautiful, actually, because nowadays, if you think about it, no, actually, that's very beautiful because nowadays, when you open, for example, social media, all that you can see are those successful people, everyone who's living a happy life, everyone who's, let's say, better off somehow. And you start wondering, how come I'm not? Like, how is it that everyone out there is just doing great? But it's a lie, it's an illusion. And like snapping out of this fake life or the fake illusions that we are trying to thrive for, I think is an essential thing.
I think if you look at we live in the UAE, so I mean, the rate of
Mm,
plastic surgery is through the
mm,
roof at the moment. And I don't say this to shame anyone. It's your body, it's your choice. But are people happier because they all have the
yeah,
same boobs or the same nose? Or I don't think so. Are they
yeah.
prettier? Not really. I don't know. You're a man, so you might have a different take on this. I don't know. But as
No,
a
honestly, like,
woman,
yeah,
I find it a bit scary that we're trying to fix. Um, we're trying external to get a sense of external validation, when really this
yeah,
is not going to go away because of your new boobs. Um,
yeah,
and don't get me wrong, it's not a judgment, but
yeah,
I do judge when people tell me it's the feminist thing to do, because I do find it to be quite the opposite. The idea that we all need to look a certain way to be valuable is just, it makes me cringe. But yeah,
yeah.
all the fake quick fixes, yeah, if you don't do the work, it won't help you.
Internally.
Yeah, it won't make you happier or less lonely, and it might not even make you prettier. So I don't know. I told you I'm not mainstream, but
Yeah. No,
yeah, that's
I think
just
like attaching our happiness to external factors is a poison. We have to start internally and like just accept ourselves and trying to disconnect from external validation, in other words.
if everyone did their internal work, there would be no wars right now, because your
Mm,
ego wouldn't get triggered, and there would not be such a thing as collective trauma. So yeah, maybe do the work and be patient with yourself, and just use that crap that will help you
mm.
grow and be happier in the long run. I don't know, maybe that's too big. That's what I try and live by.
Marianne, thank you so much. You are a wonderful person. I wish you nothing but happiness.
You too,
You're a really
Reda.
nice person.
I
Thank
hope
you.
to meet you when I'm in Abu Dhabi. I'll let you know when I'm around.
Oh, please, if you ever came around, let me know and we'll have a meeting as well.
Sounds good. Have a wonderful
Thank you
afternoon.
so much. You
Bye.
have a wonderful afternoon as well. Bye bye. Ciao.